Where's the Easter egg?
Let me go on the live right now.
It's live.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian from the Reflex Racing team. We're here at RCHQ, the host of the recently completed PN World Cup, which was a fantastic event. I want to first of all give our thanks to RCHQ for hosting the event. It was awesome. We're here today. We're going to do a clinic, an RC 128 scale racing clinic. But I think first off, I want to start off with some intros here. We got two other Reflex Racing team members here. We'll go ahead and pass it on for the Paul.
Hello, everybody. So I've been on other videos before. I'm the team manager. I go by P2. It's easier to say. My last name's kind of difficult. My name's Paul Paras. I've been with Reflex for about, actually on the team, I would say about 11 months now. Reflex has not been around that long. With 12 with the Arch 28 years. So that's all. We'll get more in depth about our cars and other things like that. This is just an intro. I'm the team manager. I'm Paul Paras.
My name is Chris Kemper. I've been running RC since about 2005. Started out running nitro cars, still running it when I can. I got into Mini-Z about 2 years ago. RCHQ introduced me to it when they had a track outside the shop.
Somebody kept bugging me.
Daniel Ayala, yes, invited me to it, and I've been hooked ever since. Brian started off running nitro with me. I told him about Mini-Z, and he wasn't interested. He's like, no, I don't want to go. As soon as he showed up, he hasn't left. Has it been 2 years?
I think, about 2 years now.
Yeah. When I started off running Mini-Z, I started running MRZ. I run a GL with the AWS chassis, and for the last year or so, I've been running a Reflex car. And all my experiences with the cars have been awesome, but for me, Reflex has been the answer to my questions as far as setup ability and things of that sort. I've known Paul for maybe 20 years. I've known Brian probably a good 10 years. Christian Tabbers I've known probably a good 15 years. Soto, I met Soto 2 years ago. He's been my son. Ethan, known him since he's been 2 years old, probably, which is 2 years ago. And RCHQ has been my RC home for the last couple of years. So hopefully they stay around forever. It's been a great experience, and they've been a great host for us. So thank you, RCHQ. Back to Brian.
Okay, and I am Brian Fong. I've been on the Reflex Racing team for a few months now. I came over from a different organization. I first started in RC about 1996. It's been a long time. But when I went into the military, I took a long break, and then I got back into it around 2010. And then off and on since 2010, I've been racing RC cars. So I've raced in the past. I've raced 12 scale, 10 scale electric on road, and 10 scale and 8 scale nitro on road. I've done a little bit of 10 scale electric off road buddy, but that was kind of more at local events. I did that kind of stuff. So it was mostly on road that I did when when I traveled to different races and stuff. So back over to Paul.
1972.
Well, since we're giving a little history about our RC careers, I started back in 1993. I started off-road back in Sacramento, California, and then I did a little bit of on-road with my first, back in 94. I guess it was 10 scale on-road. I used to race at Joel Johnson's track in California, and that's when I met EJ Evans. He was just a young kid. On the team as well. Hello, EJ. Big shout out to you. I raced on road for about, I would say, 94 to 99. I took a break. I was in Japan, living life. I picked up RC again in 2003 when I moved here in Texas. did that over there at, where was that? Hobbytown, USA? Yeah, we did on-road. Well, Kemper was doing nitro at the time. I was doing 12 scale, 10 scale pan, and touring car. So then I left, and I left here in 2008. I moved to Hawaii. I quit RC racing, right? There's no time for RC racing over there. And after I retired from the Air Force, I moved back to San Antonio in 2012. My good friend Ronnie Pena, he kept in touch with me. He said, "Hey, Paul, we got good mini cars over there at RCHQ. That's only a small." What are you talking about, man? So one day, I just came over here and I saw the cars, I saw the track. Philip Carter, an old friend of mine, had a car. I said, "Hey, Paul, try this out. This is pretty cool, but it's hard. These cars are a lot more nimble. They're agile, they're quick. And this is just a box stock car." So I didn't know what to do. So I got a box stock car. I ran it for a little bit. And Chris Kemper, he knew me from back in the day. I was on the track. He just kept saying, "Paul, you're going too slow. Move out of the way."
Luda.
So I couldn't do that. So I didn't know what kind of car to buy. There was so many options. Electronics is different over the years. So I reached out to Grant Matsushima. Big shout out to Grant over there. He's the one who really helped me get started. Several texts back and forth. Built me a couple of 2.5s. I ran those at the Fiat Nationals in 2022. I did pretty good. I came in second in the stock class. And ever since then, I've been hooked. Chris now probably with a position on the team because I was helping Chris out on the road. So that's all that I started. And this is where we are today. So back to Brian Fong.
Okay. What we wanted to do today was have a little RC clinic for a 1/28 scale. Of course, the information that we're going to provide here, you could use it towards any 1/28 scale car, but since we're Reflex Racing, we're going to focus mostly on our cars. So the adjustments and things that we're going to talk about and then demonstrate on our cars, we're going to be focusing mostly on the RX-28. But again, like the knowledge that we're going to share with you, you can apply that to probably any 1/28 scale car. So a couple of things we're going to talk about today is some theory, and then we'll actually go into some of the specific setups or adjustments that you can make on the RX-28. And then if there's time, we'll go into what we do to prepare for big races and traveling and all that. So I'll go ahead and start off here with so some important overarching questions that when you're talking about setup and what things you want to do to your car, some important questions that you got to ask yourself is, what is the level of traction on the track? Now, with on-road, I guess with racing, any type of racing, the traction is going to change from the beginning of the event to the end of the event. And traction changes throughout the day. So each day you come, the traction is going to be a little bit different. So, like for example, the PNWC, they did a track change Wednesday night, right? Wednesday night, and then the first time we got on the actual PNWC layout was Thursday morning. So Thursday morning, the track was, I would say the traction was not as high on the freshly built PNWC layout as it was on the practice layout, because the practice layout that we were running on for 2 weeks prior to the event had been down, 2 weeks, and we had plenty of practice time. But then when they changed the layout, the track was completely different. So Thursday morning, the traction was a little bit low. And then as the event progressed, by the time we got to the mains on Sunday, the traction was way higher. So whenever you're thinking about, like I said, when you're thinking about what you need, what you want to change on your car to make your car better, you have to ask yourself, what is the level of traction? things to consider is, like I said, what day you're getting on the track, and what time of day you're getting on the track. Now, I just discussed how the track changes from the beginning of the event to the end of the event. Each day, the traction can be a little different. The traction changes throughout the day. Now, for example, if you get on the track in the morning, the temperature is a little cooler, there's probably less humidity, so the traction could be a little higher in the morning. And then, as the day progresses, you get into the afternoon, the temperature goes up, humidity might go up, especially here, like in San Antonio. It's a little bit more humid, a little warmer because we're in Texas. Even though we're inside, we still have environmental factors that we have to consider, which is maybe different than like say at 5280 Raceway in Denver, where it's probably a little cooler, less humidity. Traction's going to be different there than here. So, like throughout the day, the traction can change. So you have to think about that when you're making your setup changes. Now, going back to how the traction changes from morning, afternoon to evening, like for example, like I said, in the morning it's a little cooler, a little less humidity, traction can be a little higher. In the afternoon, temperature comes up, humidity goes up, the traction may go down a little bit, and then in the evening when the temperature goes down, humidity goes down, traction comes up, and we typically call that happy hour. That's typically when we get our fastest lap. So, Chris, you wanted to say something?
More rubber on the track.
Yeah, as the day progresses, also there are more cars on the track, so more rubber's laid down on the track, and generally there's a groove that comes in. So to prep for that, before the race even happens, we kind of know that that's going to happen already. So we mount different shores of tires for the day, depending on the time we're going to be running. And that, I personally don't run firm tires, so I generally start with mediums when I need more grip. And as grip comes up, I generally go softer to make the car push and possibly not traction. And generally that tends to happen towards the end of the day. We'll talk more about tire prep and what that looks like. We mostly run mild and super stock. So for the most part, we glue our fronts and our rears. We just play around with tire diameter and things like that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as purposes.
Yeah, and I might add, at any big event, whenever they change the track, the grip's going to be low. It's just got to take time for it to get high again. So the one thing people do is they chase the traction. They get in there, the car's really good, and then they change the track, the grip is low, and they said, my car didn't work, right? So I know some world-class racers that they have a base setup, and they let the track come to them. They know their car's going to be good when the bite's on. So on that first day when they lay out the track, they really don't make that many changes. They, from their experience, they're going to know the grip's going to come up.
Yeah, and that's a good point that Paul makes. And we'll get into preparing for big races and what we should do for something like that. So I just said one big question that you want to ask yourself is, what is the level of traction? Another question you always want to ask yourself is, what is your car doing, and what do you want it to do, right? So those two questions, what level of traction and what your car is doing and what you want it to do, is going to drive all your setup changes, right? So keep those in mind. So we talked about traction. Traction typically will increase over the length of the event, right, from the beginning to the end. Traction can fluctuate, like I just said, from the morning to the afternoon to the evening. And then environmental factors like temperature and humidity definitely, even though we are inside, definitely affect the traction. So an important philosophy when you're thinking about making setup changes is make one change at a time. I mean, yes, a lot of us are really experienced, so we can probably make multiple different changes and know what's going to happen to the car. But really an important concept, a real important philosophy is just make one change at a time. Like if your car is understeering, make a change to the front and leave the rear alone, or vice versa. Like you don't want to make it overly complicated with your setups. Make one change at a time. And then one other thing is setup changes aren't exclusive, or they aren't mutually exclusive. If you make one change, it will affect something else on the car. So there's like no silver bullet or golden bullet that will fix everything. If your car is pushing, you're going to make a change, and then as a result, your car could be oversteering now. So yeah, it really depends. So, but an important concept to understand is make one change at a time. So, and see what it does. Go out, make the change, go out on the track, test it, and then come back, and then make another change. So, okay, next thing here. So we're all racing. We're racing these toy cars, and the idea of racing is going as fast as we can to complete as many laps as we can in a given certain amount of time. So, and generally speaking, the more you're on throttle, the faster you're going to go, right? So if you're going into a turn and you're coming out of the turn and you're waiting for your car, you can't get on throttle, you probably need to make a change, right? So, yeah, the more you're on throttle, probably the faster you're going to go, and that's the whole idea about RC racing. So, anything else you want to add, Paul, Chris? Okay.
We'll talk about speed control later, right?
Yeah. We'll talk about if we get time. I mean, again, like I said, the idea behind this is we'll probably hopefully spend 30, 40 minutes talking about different things here, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers, and then we'll go from there. So let me see. We had a question. We're just trying to read. Oh, a question from how come the Reflex have better corner speed than most cars? Okay, so that is so that is something that a lot of people notice at the definitely at the PNWC. It's because the Reflex Racing cars, the RX-28 has an extremely low center of gravity. I don't know if you can see this. I mean, I think most people have seen an RX-28, at least in pictures. But if you can zoom in here, everything is extremely low. Even the shock, the center damper, the motor pod, all the electronics and the battery, everything is really low to the chassis. So having everything low like that helps the center of gravity. And where this car really shines is in high traction conditions through big races. And that's one of the reasons why the RX-28, ever since its release, has been a very successful car. So our hats off to Christian and Joe for developing such a good platform. So, but okay, so some of the things that we wanted to talk about here was how to attack a corner. So in racing, at least RC racing, your races are typically won or lost in the infield. Most tracks have a long straight, everybody seems to want to go really fast on the straight, and that's all fine. But again, getting back to racing, which is what we're doing, the corner speed and attacking a corner and going fast in the infield is typically where you're going to win the race. So there's a couple of theories out there about attacking a corner. Um, People typically will divide a corner into 3 parts or 2 parts. 3 parts being corner entry, mid corner, and corner exit. Or if you subscribe to the 2-part corner, it's corner entry and corner exit. So typically, what do you do? 3-part corner?
2.
2?
Well, I'm pretty conservative. I'm not that aggressive when I drive, so I let the car pretty much roll into the corner. I'm not that aggressive in the middle of the corner, and I try to accelerate out. So unlike I think Chris is more aggressive than I am. That's why he's about 3 or 4 ticks faster. So.
Right. Yeah, I'm not a big proponent of using the brake in mod. I feel like forward motion, as long as the car continues to move forward, you get faster lap times. And the whole concept of slower is faster just means you don't have to go full bore into the corner, into the turn, let off a little earlier, let the car roll into the turn, get back on. That's my driving philosophy for those.
So I'll ask you a question. Do you ever use brake?
Not if I don't have to. I have a minimal amount of brake in my car so that if traffic is in front of me, I can slow down if necessary. I run a good amount of drag brake so that when I let off the throttle, I get brake automatically. And I tend to adjust brake throughout the day as grip level grows, or depending on how big the track is. Right now we have a pretty small track, so I have a pretty good amount of drag brake on, so I don't have to use the brake as much and extend the throttle as much as possible. And I think the same concept goes for super stock, right? For me, for super stock, I'm on throttle as much as possible. I let off to get into the corner and get out of the corner, but generally I'm on throttle more than anything. And I try to stay on throttle as much as possible without overshooting.
Yeah, so on super stock, like you mentioned, I try not to use brake, but I do use brake. If I'm out of the line, I overshoot a corner, I use the brake to try to get as close to the rail as I can. So in the super stock, I do brake. And since I run super stock in mod, it's a totally different driving style, and it kind of throws me off. It takes a few laps to get back into it. But and my speed control, my brake is very minimal. I don't want to. You have to brake too high. Super stock or mod, the car will traction away. So I sit it, my brake just enough so the car rotates when I need it to.
Is there a question?
So there was another question. What do we do in low traction conditions?
As far as setup is concerned or driving? So in low grip conditions, I tend to use my PN medium front tire. I use markers in the rear. I usually start with 10s because they provide a little bit more grip. As traction comes up, I go soft, right? So I don't have as much steering to make the car push a little bit. But again, in low grip, I run a gear dip. So the car's always punchy no matter when or no matter what the grip is. But I offset that by the tire choice I use at that particular time of the day. That tends to help. When the car starts to push, I go harder. The car gets tippy, wants to traction roll, I go softer and gently. In low grip conditions, run a grippier tire, so mediums all the way around.
So we wanted to talk about, attacking a corner. So like we just kind of discussed, Kemper likes to use a lot of drag brake. However, we've noticed that there's kind of 2 different driving styles, right? There's the person that likes to use drag brake, lift, and then let the car roll through the corner. And then you might have another driver who's like Grant. We know that Grant likes to use a lot of brake. So he's braking in every corner. So he hits the brake, gets the car to shift weight, and then goes to the corner, and then gets back on it. So I guess that really depends on the driving style, really depends on what you feel comfortable with. But typically in corner entries, when you're going to lift or you're going to hit your brake, And then you're going to hug that apex of that turn, and then once you come out of the corner exit, you're going to get back on throttle. So ideally, you want to get back on throttle as quick as you can. Again, like we're racing, so we're trying to go as fast as you can. So in corners, typically you either have an understeer condition or an oversteer condition, right? So things that you want to fix, or if you're trying to make setup changes, your car's either understeering or oversteering, right? So understeering is when you go into the corner, you turn your wheel, and your car is kind of pushing past the corner, right? And then in an oversteer condition, you turn your wheel, and the back end wants to swap ends, right? It wants to spin out. So it's important to understand those concepts, right? Corner entry, mid-corner, corner exit, understeer, and oversteer, so that when you're asking someone for help and they ask you, where is your car pushing? Corner entry or corner exit? Is your car oversteering on corner exit or corner entry? It's important that you have an understanding of what is happening to your car, and then you're able to have same vocabulary when you're talking to someone else.
And speaking of those conditions, for me, I generally adjust droop or change my tire. When guys do ask me for help and they give me their car and I'm looking at the car, either there's a ton of droop in the car, front and rear, or no droop. And in any of those situations, you're going to get the same result, which is a push or a spin out, right? Generally, if it's oversteer, especially for the RX car, honestly, you don't want to run anything harder than medium in the front. In my experience, anything harder than the medium causes an oversteer.
Except for Michael Maldonado.
Except for maybe Maldonado. That's the key. But he's a world-class driver. So for a push, again, may mean you don't have enough grip, so you can go to a harder medium. So in a nutshell, prepare mediums and softs for your day for the front, KS or KSM, whatever floats your boat. And then for the rears, have 15s, 10s, and 5s mounted up. So depending on the time of the day, you can try each tire and see which tire works best.
Okay. Speaking of tires, so Kemper just talked about tires, but so when you're talking about tires, diameter, right? What size tires really plays an important factor into what your car is doing. Like if you if you didn't cut your front tires and you're running them really big, there's a chance that you might oversteer because the taller sidewall is going to grab more and drive that front end. Versus a smaller front tire. If you've cut your front tire, and you've worn them out, or you've worn them out really low, you could understeer because now there's no sidewall for the tire to grip, right? So diameter is really important. Same thing with the rear. If you're running a really, like a new tire right out of the package, they're going to probably be around 25 millimeters. So if you're so that tall of a sidewall, you might have a lot of rear grip, and your car may not rotate or get around the corner very fast because there's too much sidewall in the rear. So you may have to cut those rears down.
So it's a little tire diameter in the front is key. There's more information on our latest Reflex Buzz podcast. EJ Evans talks about how he glues the sidewall and put another layer of glue, he'll file it down. So watch that episode. There's good info there.
Yeah, exactly. So, gluing. So, gluing versus tape, right? So a lot of us, we pretty much all glue our tires. If you tape your tires, taping takes away some of the grip that the tires have. So We typically do not tape our tires, but you can. I mean, it really depends on the layout of your track where you're racing. It depends on the level of traction. Depends on how you have your car set up and your driving style, right? But typically, we do not tape our tires. If anything, you could, if the traction's really high, you could tape the front tires, and then that will take away some of the front grip. But like I said, we mostly glue our tires. And then, as they've discussed, gluing the front sidewall. So if you're racing on a high grip track, and you notice that the other cars on the track, there's a lot of cars traction roll, try gluing that outside front tire, the outside edge, sidewall. So that'll take away some of that grip. So if you're, like I said, if you're racing in a high traction condition, that will help prevent some of that traction roll. So.
Boss said, "How do you glue?"
How do we glue? Let me see here. So,
Use this? Do you use this?
Yeah. You want to kind of demo that? So there's different ways, right? There's a tire gluing machine that Reflex is coming out with. I think one of our buddies up in Denver, he has also has a little tire gluing machine. ARR has this tire gluing tool there. And if you want to just kind of demonstrate.
It's an art form. I think there are several videos out there. I think maybe Marcus Williams has one he did last year. Basically, you put a tire on, and the way I do it, it's hard to do it with one hand, but what I like to do at first is just I put it the backside so it's facing out. You can see that, and then you have your glue and your needle. Make sure you get glue bottles with needles, fresh glue all the time. What I'll do is I'll put a small bead around the backside while lifting it. You gotta lift the edge, or just get a small bead so that the tire stays pretty straight. So once I do that, then I'll actually flip the entire tire so the front side is out. And then I lift the front end, I fill it with glue, and I just work it all the way around. Then once I see the glue kind of spilling out, I'll take it out and then wipe it down with the microfiber. I like shop towels actually, and that's pretty much it. It's an art form. I think Marcus has a good video how to do it. Go watch that.
Somebody said, "Do you glue independent of the track size for small track is needed?"
So, yeah. Again, I think that really depends on. So we just raced on a small track, what we consider a small track here this weekend. We're all still gluing. We didn't change our tire gluing or tire taping versus gluing to accommodate for track size. I would think that having a smaller track, you would want to glue because you're probably, the corners are tighter. You need that traction to get around those corners quicker. It really, like I said, I think the only situation that we would ever consider taping would be taping the front tires in an extremely high traction condition. That's probably, my opinion and everybody else's opinion. But again, we've raced a lot of national level events and just recently concluded PNWC, we were gluing all of our tires. So. Okay. Let me see here. So, no, I think that was the last.
That just said so. Only rear and front, not on the rim. Sidewall, we also do.
So again, it really depends if you want to glue. So we don't glue the rear sidewalls. I know that is something that they do like in 10th scale on-road electric carpet racing. They may glue the outside rear sidewalls if the traction is extremely high, because then that helps the car rotate around. But we typically do not. And again, only in high traction conditions will we start, gluing the front sidewalls. So, and that really, it really depends on, the traction level. Again, going back to some of those important questions that you got to ask yourself. As you're racing and you're watching the other cars on the track, you got to see, okay, what are they doing? Are they traction rolling? What day of the event is it? What time of day is it? Those kind of questions. So if we start seeing other cars traction roll, and if we're not already gluing on sidewalls, then we may consider start doing our sidewalls. Yeah, we typically don't traction roll. Our cars, again, the RX-28's got such a low center of gravity that, we don't traction roll. Knock on wood.
Corey Bosworth's question: do we use 8.5 or 11 millimeter fronts? Some people have had on the team have had great success with the 11 millimeter fronts. I personally, I've tried them. They tend to push a little bit for me, but I'm heavy on entry into the corner, and for me, the 8.5s get into the corner better. But for a pad car, which is probably the most difficult class to drive, to help take some of that initial steering away, the 11 millimeter fronts will help with that and make the car a little easier to drive. And I think for the most part in PAN, they're always trying to make the car easier to drive or easier to handle because the car is already dark in a way. So I would say try both to see what works best for you. For me, 8.5s work best for me, but I'm still in the testing stage of testing the 11 millimeters to see if I can get them to work the way I like them. But for me, 8.5 is the way to go.
I ran 11. Yeah, I ran 11s yesterday in PAN car, 11 with the 2134 PN soft tires. They were good in the beginning. The tire was maybe about 22.4, but at the end of the day, during the main, it got a little too small, and my car started pushing. So, like Chris said, I think it makes it a little easier to drive. But that's everyone's different. I know some of our team drivers said it's more aggressive. Some guys say it's easier to drive. You just have to test it out yourself and find what works for you.
Okay. The next thing, a really important setting is droop. So droop really controls the transfer of weight from front to rear and from left to right. So your center damper, if we want to zoom in on that, all right? So can you see that maybe? So the center damper controls, an important thing to understand is when your car accelerates, the pod actually lifts. Let me see if, I don't know if you can see that. Because of the way that the wheel and the motor are spinning, right? The motor is actually spinning backwards, right? And the axle, if you're going forward, it's spinning this way, right? So when you accelerate, your pod is actually lifting. So the amount of droop that you have in your center damper is controlling the transfer of weight to the rear on acceleration. And then when you go into a corner entry, the damper is actually compressing. So the weight is transferring to the front. All right? So that's an important thing to understand. So, and then depending on how your car is reacting going into the turn or coming out of the turn, you may increase droop or decrease it, right? And even change a spring, right? So we're running the new center damper here. This car here has the old center damper, right? And typically what we do to measure droop on this is we measure the amount of daylight that you're seeing in between the damper nut here and the shaft. So typically on this old damper here, the kit damper, we're running either a 1/2 mil or 1 mil of space in between here, right? So the more droop you have, the more space here means more droop. Typically in lower traction conditions, you may want to run more droop. In higher traction conditions, you'll unscrew this and close some of that space so that maybe you only have about a 1/2 mil showing. When you close that space up, you close the amount of droop, and now you're not allowing as much weight to transfer to the rear under acceleration. So now the car is reacting faster. You're not having to close up that amount of space there. So, and then on the new center damper, which is what this car has here, we typically will measure from end to end the length of the shock. And typically, the starting measurement for this center damper is 36.5 millimeters. So if you want to decrease the amount of droop, let's say you want the car to rotate faster in the corner, you're going to make that shock length, the damper length, smaller. So you may go to 36 millimeters. Or if you need more droop, you're going to make it longer. So maybe 37 millimeters. So, but yeah, for this is the starting position for this new center damper is 36.5. So that's rear droop. Front droop is how much the car is lifting under acceleration, right? So again, when you accelerate, the front end is going to transfer, it's going to lift, and weight's going to transfer to the rear. And then under deceleration, the car is going to compress like this. So typically, under acceleration, when you're coming out of the corner, if your car is really lazy, then you want to take a little droop out of here so that the car doesn't have to lift as much. That's out of the corner, coming out of the corner. There's sometimes you can give it more droop and then have the car roll more, and then that'll help your steering. But typically, with these cars, we run anywhere from I'd say from 0.4 millimeters of droop to maybe 0.8 millimeters of droop, somewhere in between. It really depends on, again, level of traction and your driving style and what you want your car to do. So let me see.
So I answer the next question really quick. Easiest way to glue. I would say I use a Loctite glue as well, Nick. But when you purchase the needles for the glue bottle, they come in different sizes. So, the glue nozzle may be a little bigger than it needs to be. But I try to move the needle through the tire pretty quickly so it doesn't stick. And then have a microfiber towel or shop towel to wipe it off. You gotta wipe it off quickly, otherwise it'll stick to the glue, which will stick to the wheel and your tire and the tire rejects. So play around with the size of your needle to make sure that maybe the hole isn't too big and you don't have too much glue coming out at one time. There isn't like a best practice of doing it. You just have to do it enough to make it comfortable for you. And over time, you'll find the best way to do it. That's what's worked for me, but just play around with the needle size. But the Loctite glue for me is good. Also, I use denatured alcohol to clean the inside of the tire and the inside of the wheel so that the glue sticks to it. And once I glue it and I go run, I check my tire and my glue after every run to make sure it doesn't come unglued. Because you may go out there and your car is doing weird stuff, and you're like, my car isn't handling right, it's horrible. Look at your tires, and your tires are unglued. So check your glue after every run, make sure.
Yeah, that's actually really important. So I would say that for most people, the box stock setup is really good. I think
Just won the world.
yeah, I think Michael just won the world 3 times using a box stock kit, RX-28. So the box stock setup is really good. So in most situations, start off with that, or if you're having issues, go back to that, right? So that's a good starting point. Just like back to tire gluing and all that, just like Chris said. So I'd say, this is just my personal assessment, 70% of 1/28 scale is tires. The tire game, this is kind of like 12 scale, right? Where the tire game is 70% of this, right? So if you're gluing tires and your glue game is not on point, right? Your glue is coming off the tire, or if you're gluing the sidewalls and you're not doing that right, you may have a lot of issues. So it's really important to really work on that, to make sure you get that as perfect as possible. Because I mean, if your tire's coming off the wheel, or if your sidewall gluing is not really good, it's going to really affect your car. So
Yeah, on the sidewall glue, if you get glue on the tire, you're gonna lose grip. So my best practice is I glue on my tires before I chew them, so that if the glue gets on the tire, the chewer takes care of that for me. So if I'm a little messy with my glue, and if you're new to gluing tires, you may be a little messy. Best practice, glue your tires first before you put them on the chewer. So that if it does get a little messy, the chewer takes that glue off and you got your glue. But, practice. Maybe try some tires you don't use, some old tires, and try to practice gluing that way. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, to Brian's point, that's half the battle. Sometimes you run your tires too much and you get them too low, the car doesn't act right. You put a fresh set of tires on, all of a sudden you got the best handle car on the road. So new tires is a go-to, but come to the track prepped with tires already. So you're not looking for the right set to run at the right time. So be prepared before you go.
yeah, okay. So Drew, again, that's a really important setup change you can make. That really affects the car. The rear droop and the front droop really can affect understeer or oversteer. So, of course, if you have any questions, just post them up about that. The next thing we wanted to talk about is camber. So camber is, so there's not a whole lot of adjustments as far as camber on these cars, but we do have some aluminum front arms that are adjustable. We don't have them. Do you have them on your car right now, Paul? Okay, so Paul does have some aluminum adjustable front arms. Reflex just released some, or actually has some spy shots of the plastic adjustable arms that are coming out. So camber is how much or how little the front wheels are tilting in or out. And really the thing about camber is having your tire maintain the appropriate amount of contact patch to the ground. If you notice that your tires are coning a certain direction, like they're reverse coning, where the outside of the tire is smaller than the inside of the tire, then you may want to give it more camber. And then if the inside of the tire is wearing more than the outside, then you may have too much camber. So in that situation, you take some camber out. Typically on the front, so if you start running the adjustable front arms, typically with the front tires, you want them to run flat as possible. So if you notice that the tires are wearing unevenly, then you'll adjust camber. Typically, a good starting point is probably 1 degree, and then plus or minus a quarter degree. So, did you have something?
So we got a question from Nick. It says his car seems a bit twitchy, off center on the straight when I try to make small adjustments to line up for the next corner. Would an expo adjustment in the radio calm it down? Or is there an adjustment on the car that might help? I don't think the expo adjustment on the radio would help. That would just numb the steering response down. That more seems to me like it's a tweak issue. If the car is not balanced left to right, we use these little tweak stations to make sure that all the tires have the same pressure on all 4 tires. Right. So when you get out of the corner, one side does not have more pressure than the other. It's equal, so the car's not going to spin out or want to favor one direction or another.
Could be your tires too.
It could be your tires too, right? So maybe if it's twitchy, your front tires might be a little bit tall, or they might be a little bit hard, or the rear tires could be a little bit softer?
Yeah, I mean there could be there could be a lot of things. Not knowing how your car is set up, we're just speculating. But I mean there could be a lot of issues that we're not aware of. But yeah, just like Paul said, the tweak station is probably your first step. Is check the tweak, make sure that it's there's no tweak in the car. But yeah, there could be a lot of things. It's difficult to know if we don't know what your setup is. So
I think uneven droop in the front can cause that too. If the droop's not even in the front, can you get on power or off power? One tire will lift up more than the other. So you've got to make sure your droop's equal in the front as well, left to right.
Okay, next thing is caster. So with the new Gen 2 cars, we have a fixed 2 degrees here in the front bulkhead, but the older cars, you were able to adjust the caster. You can move the front arms forward or back by use of shims. So when you move the arms back, meaning you add some shims in the back, you're giving it more caster. And then when you take the shims out and move them to the front, you're taking some caster out. Basically, when you move the arms back, let me see if we can zoom in on that. When you're moving the arms back by adding shims here, you're basically you're changing the geometry of the front end of the car. You're adding more Ackerman, you're changing, you may be changing the camber, you're basically adding more steering. So, and vice versa, if you want to take some steering out of your car, you can move the front arms forward by moving the shim to the front. So, the Gen 2 car did away with that. We basically have a fixed front end now. So it's fixed at 2 degrees. And it's actually pretty good. I mean, I think a lot of guys used to run 4 degrees of caster with the arms all the way back. That gives you more on power steering, but it also could make the car harder to drive. So I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to Casterville. Okay, let me see here. Next thing, bump steer. So on these cars, I don't know if you can zoom in right there. This is where you can add or subtract shims to take away some of that bump steer. So if you've ever looked at a 2-wheel drive off-road buggy and you push the front end of the 2-wheel drive off-road buggy up and down, those front ends, and you look at the tires, those tires are probably moving a lot because 2-wheel drive off-road buggies have a lot of bump steer. That's typically an undesirable condition for an on-road car. So what we've been doing is adding shims, adding like a 1 mil or a half mil shim right underneath the steering link there, and that takes away some of that bump steer. So basically, what happens is if your track is a little bumpy, like here they pick up and put away the RCP, the track, every 2 weeks. So and then when they put the track down, it's not really flat, right? It's kind of bumpy because it's not sitting out all the time. But so what happens is our track is kind of bumpy. So when the cars are going over those bumps, us adding some shim here will help keep that wheel from being affected by the bumps, right? So we're taking away some of that bump steer. So that's an adjustment you can do there. Yeah, it just makes the car easier to drive, especially on a bumpy track. So Ackerman is the next thing to talk about. So Ackerman is basically the angle of the front arms here, the front steering links. So on the RX, you can either have the steering servo in the reverse position, in the rearward position, or the forward position. And in the rearward position, you're getting more Ackerman, meaning the steering links are more angled. And then in the forward position, the steering links are straighter. So what that affects is your initial turn in, in corner entry. So if you need a little more corner entry, you can move the steering servo back, and that'll give you more acronym. But that's typically done in, you can do that on a tight track. You can do that in a lower traction condition. Typically in higher traction conditions, we move the servo forward, and that takes away some of that acronym. So basically what happens with acronym is if you have your steering servo back, you have more acronym, and that changes the slip angle of the inside wheel. So more acronym is going to make this inside wheel more angled than the outside wheel. So, and then in higher traction, in higher traction conditions, we typically, like I said, we would move the servo forward, and that'll take away some of the slip angle on these wheels, so that these wheels, as they're turning, will be more similar, the angle. So, anything else to add? Okay. Damping. So again, like in most 28 scale cars, we're using grease dampers, right? So basically, what the damping does is control with droop, you're affecting the weight transfer. With damping, you're affecting how quickly that weight transfers, right? So either you have grease in the center damper, you have grease in the side dampers, and then you typically have grease on these front dampers here. So basically, if you're running thicker grease, that weight transfer is going to be a little slower. And if you're running thinner grease, weight transfer is going to be faster. So if you need a car to react faster, say if you got a chicane or if you got a small tight track, maybe you want to go with thinner grease or thicker grease. It just depends. It depends on depends on what your individual driving style. So let me see. Springs. So again, springs. You've got a range of springs. Kid springs. Well, a lot of times, yeah. Again, like Paul said, kid springs. The kid setup works really well, but you can change from soft springs, medium springs, or harder springs. It really just depends what you want. Like a softer spring in the front is going to make the front a little lazier. It's a little lazier off center when you go into a turn. A harder spring is going to make the car a little more reactive. Like if you want the car to react a little bit faster when you turn the wheel, you might go to a harder spring in the front. Same thing with the rear. Again, remember when you accelerate, the pod is lifting, right? So that spring is not really affecting anything until you decrease your speed when you go into a corner. So when you go into a corner, that's when the spring comes into play. So if you need a little more traction, let's just say you go into a corner and you're oversteering on corner entry, you may want to go to a little stiffer spring because the stiffer spring will be able to handle weight better. So, or if you need more rotation going into corner entry, you may want to go to a softer spring. We got a question here. Do you notice a difference with the mass damper versus no mass damper? How many grams of weight are you running on the mass damper? Each piece is, yeah. So I think Christian did speak about this on the Reflex Racing podcast that we have, like Paul said. Definitely check that out. The mass dampers, we tried them out for the first time at the Worlds, a lot of us. And I know from just my personal experience with my cars, I felt like when I put the mass dampers on, so we were running the mass dampers front and rear. Some of us were just running them on the front. Some of us were just running them on the rear. I know from my experience, I felt like my car was much easier to drive when I put the mass dampers on. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, I can echo the same words that Brian said. Maybe it was a placebo effect, but I went in going with my 2 mod cars, 2 cars for each class, and then I was able to source a set of mass dampers. I put them on one of my cars, and it just transformed the car. It seemed like it was easier to drive. So during the event, I just switched to running one car with the mass dampers. We don't have the kit that has multiple weights. I'm not sure what Joe Chen put on my car. Maybe it's a 1 gram.
Those are like 1 gram, 9.9 grams.
Yeah, so these are the smallest weights. I believe. Does a kit come with extra?
Yeah, they come with 3 total weights. So the kits, when you buy them from Reflex, they come with 3 weights. They're all 0.9 grams, and it'll come with a center shaft. I think they're releasing, I think Christian did speak to this on the podcast. They are going to release some springs. So if you noticed from our pictures from the PNWC, a lot of us are running springs here above and below the weight. The current kits don't have the springs. Christian did speak to this in the podcast. They are coming out with a more refined spring. What we did during the PNWC, all of us who were running the mass dampers, we actually just cut some KISS springs in half. We were running the soft front KISS springs. We cut them in half, and then we did the appropriate shimming to make sure the preload was right. And then most of us were running just one weight on the front, or for the mass dampers. I'm actually running a mass damper in the front and the rear, so I'm running one weight on each side of the car. So I think hopefully that answers the question. Okay, so let's get into how we prepare for a big race. I don't know if you want to, Paul or Chris, you want to go first? How do you prepare for a big race?
I practice as much as possible, whenever I can. During the week before the race, I'm out, do all my tires, cut them, trim them, prep them, try to break them in as much as I can before going. If you've been to enough races, you kind of already know what to expect. It's going to start off low, and it's going to end up medium to high. So again, just prep your tires so that you don't have to waste your practice time after the race trying to do so. As much time on the track as you can, learn the layout for the most part. Adjust your droop, try different tires depending on the time of day to see what feels the best, and then you just go for broke. Q1, whatever feels the best in practice. You go with that. Just prepare before you get to the track, so that when you get to the track, you can focus on being on the track.
Yeah, that's the same strategy I use. One thing, I make sure the cars are in pristine condition. I replace parts that need to be replaced in the slot, clean my bearings, rebuild the diffs, make sure there's nothing binding, and then I'll set the car up, I'll tweak it, I'll do the right height, and then I'll spend a lot of time on my tires. I'm on pretty much all the sets I think I'll need for the weekend. I'll chew them down. Usually when you go to a big race, you don't get much practice time on the track, so most of that time is just used to break in tires. So a good idea is to go to your local track, bring all your tires, break them in there, and then when you go to the big event, they'll at least be broken in already. That's how I prepare.
Yeah, similar here. We all travel, about 3 times a year, maybe more, to different travel races. We typically, RCHQ has a big race here in January we go to. We typically go to 5280 Raceway to go to Denver and race there. There's several other tracks around the country that host travel races that we're looking to attend. But yeah, Similar thing. I'll just reiterate what they said. I'll glue up all my tires. I typically will glue about 6 sets of every tire. So I typically stick to KSs. I don't really like running KSMs in the front. Also, I'll glue up like 6 softs, 6 mediums, and 6 firms, and then in the rear I typically run Marca tires. So I'll glue up 6 5, 6 10s, and 6 15s, and then go from there. So at the event, like they said, like Paul and Chris said, you don't get a lot of practice time. You'll typically get practice time. We'll go, a travel race will typically get there Wednesday night or Thursday morning. We'll practice like all day Thursday, but then once the event starts and qualifying starts, you typically don't get a lot of practice time. So all your testing and race prep has to happen typically at your local track. So, but since, we go to a lot of national level events, we get to test in real world environments, so to speak. So, anything can happen. But even at the race, right? If we find ourselves in a situation where we have to glue and cut more tires, we kind of developed a method for doing that as well, like getting them on the tire truer, gluing them, getting them on the tire truer, and then making sure that they're as close to as possible, being ready as close as possible, so that when we get on the track and we are on new tires, we only usually, hopefully, get tires that are broken in. We can break our tires in 2 to 3 laps. So, yeah. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. So, okay. I think that is it. That we'll cover today. I think we've already gone about an hour. So if there are any other questions, we can answer them now. I think Ebert said how many sets each. So I glue up 6. That's probably similar to what everybody else glues up.
About 10.
10?
Kemper uses 10. I do about 6. At the PN Worlds, Worlds that we had, I didn't go through very many tires. It was weird. Initially, we started going through tires, the grip was low. When the grip came up,
Yeah.
I maybe used maybe 1 set of tires.
Yeah, I experienced the same thing. Like, so yeah, when the grip was low, we were running through tires because the tires, because of the low grip, we're fighting traction. So they're wearing out a lot faster. But once the grip came up, we were on, I think, once we figured out what tires we were going to run, we were on that same set of tires pretty much all throughout qualifying in the main. So it's interesting like that. You don't really, once you get into qualifying in the mains, your tires don't really wear out that much. It's all that practice time prior to qualifying is where you're using up most of the tires that you've prepped, right? Because you're trying to find the right compound that you want. You're trying to find the right diameter, so you're cutting tires, and maybe you cut them too short. You're like, oh man, I need bigger tires, so you put another set on and all that. So, but yeah, once we got into qualifying the tires, once we found the compound and size we wanted, that was pretty much it. We stuck to the same set of tires.
And one last thing on tires, just because I run market 15s in the rear doesn't mean Brian's going to run them. As we found out yesterday, I use them in the club race, and for him, it just doesn't work, right? Our cars are probably set up just a little bit different. Driving style might be different. So there's no really one set of tire that will work for everybody. You got to experiment for yourself. Like Chris, what'd you run? Did you run 5 yesterday? Did you end up?
Yeah, started off for 10s, ended up on 5. That usually ends up being my go-to at the end of the day is 5s.
Right. So if I use 5, my car will probably spit out. I don't know. So that's one thing. There are many setups. People ask for what's your ESC settings. It just doesn't work like that. We just can't say, well, this is what you got to do. Have these magic numbers. We don't know the size of your track. We don't know how much straightaway you have, how much infield you have. The turbo and boost might be different. And another thing is with your ESC settings and modified, you can make the car transform from a good car to a bad car just by adding drag brake, turbo and boost. The ESC is a powerful tool in modified. You may have a great car, but if the ESC is not set up right, your lap times just won't be there.
A couple questions before we close from my son Soto. What are y'all most excited to see? Who are y'all most excited to race against in 2024 season? And is there anything different you will implement in your program for 2024? I look forward to racing everybody every other weekend, every month when we travel. More in competition, but it's fun. This little, small family that we have, we race with every other weekend, we travel with. So it's just a good time, no matter what. But I'm always looking forward to racing Soto, who's holding down RTRC for the entire nation.
Don't forget about Grant. Grant's out there too. Grant Chapin, not you, Grant Matsushima.
But definitely, Soto, Grant being in Texas as well has been an instrumental boost to us as having this level of driving to race against every other weekend. Helps to make us all better and share knowledge across the team. So just a bunch of old guys playing with toy cars, having fun, making new friends, and continuing to make it. So
That's what it's all about, right? Not win or lose, but just hang out.
love y'all too. Bigger tracks or more technical tracks. We all started out on technical tracks, right? I don't want to say it was RCHQ who introduced the huge tracks, but now when we travel to race, we are expecting the huge tracks. So a huge technical track is good as well. So I wouldn't say one's better than the other. But I think with us all learning from a technical track, you can carry that forward onto a big track. So I do feel it well.
Yeah, right, for sure. Because our track we have right now, like Grant made it real small. Like, what's going on here? Where's the straightaway? 2 tiles here, 2 tiles there.
He thought he was trying to get us, but we got it.
It was still fun, challenging, right?
But
I've seen the track.
no 2 tiles, please.
I said no.
No 2 tiles, please. Once you get us used to these 4 tiles, you can't go backwards, okay? That's all. All right, that's it for me, Brian.
That's it for me. I'm out.
I think Ethan Martinez has the last question. He asked, are yellow rims faster than white or black rims? Yellow rims, of course.
Yes.
Great. Well, first one, any color you can get for free.
Yeah, see, Kemper's got yellow rims on too, so it's team yellow.
No, not that.
Oh
color.
no, that's a different car.
You didn't see that, Christian.
So yellow rim.
I think somebody
I don't
else.
even run yellow.
Oh,
Good
somebody
question.
also asked what classes you guys running in France.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, we'll close with that. Next, in 2024, we are definitely looking forward to the PNWC in France. I think for me, I'm going to race the same 3 classes I ran this year, all-wheel drive, 2-wheel drive mod, and PAD. So no changes for me there.
Ditto.
I'm not going.
Oh my God.
I can't get a passport. I applied for a TSA pre-check about 2 months ago. What's going on, TSA? Hook me up. No, I just can't go. Too many family things going on.
So, except for Paul, I think we're going to try to get the whole team, the whole Reflex Racing team to go to France. So, should be a good experience. We're all looking forward to it. So, okay. Well, I think that's it. I don't know if are we gonna try to do this again sometime, maybe? So, yeah, we'll look forward to trying to do this again sometime. Okay. So, I guess on behalf of Paul and Chris Kemper here, I'm Brian. And I guess we'll talk to everybody later.
Big shout out to
Big shout out to
RCHQ.
RCHQ for hosting PNWC and letting us race here every other week. We really enjoy it. We're thankful for them having us. So, thank you.